Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Tsunami is Coming, What Keeps You Up at Night edition. It's my great pleasure to greet another colleague from HEC Paris, a professor in the Management and Human Resources department at HEC Paris, and my good friend, Julien Jourdan. Julien, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Jeremy. Thank you for having me.
Julien, to you, like to all of my other guests, my initial question, Julien, tell us what keeps you up at night.
Well, what keeps me up at night is the persistence of organizational malfeasance. And what I've been studying in the last 10 years or so is the question of organizational scandal. So how come, organizational misconduct can persist for a very, very long time, sometimes, years, sometimes even decades, without being addressed and without the perpetrators being, stopped. And we see examples of this all the time. And it's a very mysterious process. So I think it's, from a research standpoint, it's very interesting because we don't know. We don't know. There are only a few things we know. So I have conducted research with one of my colleagues who is at Rice University, Alessandro Piazza. We studied the Catholic Church. So we studied the priests, the cases of priests being accused of sexual misconduct in the United States. We published a couple of studies. One that was on the effect of the scandal on competition. The different denominations in the US, Christian denominations, competing for members. And the second one, which was published in 2024, which is a paper about what we call the publicization of organizational misconduct. So how information, which tends to be private, about malfeasance and misconduct, may or may not, in many cases, become public, part of the public sphere, if we want to use Habermas' concept, so part of the public conversation. And what we observe is that in many cases, well, there is no secret, right? The information is out there. Usually we tend to think of scandal as a revelation of misconduct, but actually, no, misconduct is out there, it's available. Maybe not everyone knows, but a lot of people know. It stays there and doesn't create a scandal. So in a way, it's the non-occurrence of scandal, which is the most mysterious to me.
So I think you're being modest, Julien, because on a LinkedIn post, you did offer two interesting hypotheses. One is the cost, the way you're going to reformulate it, but I read it as the cost of betraying your tribe, so to speak.
Yeah.
Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so we basically highlight two main theoretical mechanisms to explain why information doesn't become public, why it doesn't surface. The first mechanism, there is indeed a social cost of speaking up against your own people, if you want. Again, in your community, when you reveal misconduct, especially organized misconduct, you attract blame to the community, you attract scrutiny, and this is obviously not welcome by the other members of the community. So social cost is one of the issues, right? So most members of the community have an incentive of not speaking up, even if they want to, if they know that they will be punished for doing that. There is literature on whistleblowers showing that whistleblowers usually are punished. But think about the church case, right? If you're a churchgoer, the church is an important component of your community. It's hard to speak against the church, right? So we have plenty of qualitative and quantitative evidence showing that there is indeed a social cost for doing that.
And there's a second reason then.
Yeah.
You said the closed network, which is very striking to me too.
Yes. So even if people accept to speak up, the information is likely to be restricted to small cliques, if you want, and is unlikely to reach out the broader public, which usually happens through the media. Right. So what we studied is the existence of ties in the community. So we rely on the work of Robert Putnam, which I think you might be familiar with, right? This idea that there is there are social ties in a community that connect people, which tends to be otherwise disconnected. So places like, bowling alleys, club association, sports association. So places where people who, usually don't tend to interact get to meet. And this is where you exchange ideas. This is where you exchange rumors. And rumors are very important in the context of a scandal, because this is how you make sense of something that is both scary and hard to understand. So you talk about it to try to understand what is going on. So this is when the information circulates. So what we find is that the more communities, the richer they are in terms of these social ties, that allows information to circulate, and the more likely the information is to be publicized. So that's one of the three hypotheses we formulate. The other two relate to the social cost of speaking up. The first one has to do with homogeneity, and especially we look at ethnic homogeneity in the context of the US. So, and here the basic idea that the more homogeneous a community is, and the higher the cost, right? So if we are all the same, if we all belong to the same group, right? If there is a scandal, all the community will be affected, right? If there are different subgroups in the community, in a way, contamination will be only affecting one part of the community. So the overall cost for the community will be smaller. And indeed, what we find is that the more homogeneous the community is, and the less likely the scandal happens, right? And the third element is, it has to do with, we call it embeddedness. It has to do a little bit with dependence and power. So if the organization, because we're looking at organized malfeasance, if the organization is powerful, if it controls a lot of resources, then the cost of speaking up is even higher, right? So the more, in our case, the more the Catholic Church was prevalent in the community, and the less likely the information was to surface and become broadly available to the public.
Julien, what you're saying is fascinating at so many levels. So let me try to structure this. The first naive question, and I hope you forgive me, is when I listen to you, I am tempted to tie this back to what I know about political polarization and tribalism. Is that a legitimate tie to make? The idea that, societies are fractured among groups that tend to live with each other and not necessarily correspond with others.
Yes, I think it's a good observation. And to some extent, I don't know any research on that. I think I know that somebody's working on it. But there is an hypothesis that, the more fragmented the society is, the more polarized it is, and the less likely there will be scandals. Right? And it's kind of fascinating these days. If you follow social media, there are so many things that seem strange that could be called a scandal. Sometimes they are called a scandal, but the scandal doesn't happen because it stays confined with these circles, and it fails to reach a mass threshold, at which point it becomes indeed a proper corporate scandal or organizational scandal.
And could it also be because these scandals usually concern the other tribe that you're pointing your finger at, and that to some extent the other tribe doesn't really understand or see the world the same way because of polarization?
Exactly.
Could be.
Exactly. So I think that actually prevents scandal from happening, because to some extent, to have a scandal, there needs to be a widespread outrage. So it means that there's a moral component to scandal, right? So you need to see the conduct that is described as being misconduct as being immoral, as being wrong, evil, if you will, right? But indeed, well, if the other camp, if one camp sees it as good and the other camp sees it as evil, well, there's a chance that it won't coalesce into a scandal. I would love to do some empirical work on that.
This is an interesting hypothesis, I guess, to explore. The other thing that I find very striking, and again, maybe this is naive or me thinking a little bit too differently here, is in the process that you're describing, I'm reminded of what the author Michael Lewis came up with when he tried to describe the whole rationale behind social distancing during the pandemic. When in the initial days of the pandemic, most models were basically based on simulations, but we were all, you, me, everyone were just dots. And when his daughter pointed out to the fact that that made no sense because inside the system, there were clusters of people that interacted more with each other than with the rest. Does that capture a little bit, I guess, the spread of a rumor and the spread of a virus? Is that a viable comparison, do you think?
Well, it's definitely something that social network scientists think about, right? So how
Mm,
information circulates in networks, and it circulates in a manner that is not completely, different than a virus circulating in a population, because you need contact, right? So you need social ties, and information circulates throughout the network in the same way than a virus actually
mm,
spread within population or a subpopulation. So yes, indeed, there are some similarities. Of course, it's a metaphor if you want. A network is kind of a metaphor,
mm,
and information doesn't always pass through the nodes. In this, virus don't always contaminate as well. So I mean, yeah, there are some similarities indeed.
mm. And I guess one other point that you raised in one LinkedIn post is the relationship with the Epstein files, which is very striking. I guess it goes straight. The comparison with the Catholic Church is easier to draw
Mhm.
because when you think about it, the Epstein file, the more we open up, the more we learn about people involved. Sometimes people who we never really imagined could have been involved, including in academia
Yeah.
as well. The case of Larry Summers, I think, is the most striking one. Could you speak to so what keeps you up at night, I guess, but also what do you think this says about the world we live in? Has this always been the case historically? Or in your opinion, do you have evidence to suggest this is something rather new? And in any case, does that say anything important, I guess, about our societies?
Is it new? I don't think so.
Yeah.
When you go back in time, you find scandals, in ancient times.
Mm-hmm.
Very famous scandals in Rome, for instance, that have been
Mm-hmm.
documented at the time. And the dynamics are kind of similar to what we observe today. Of course, it may take different forms, and maybe, the diffusion of information might be different because we have, social networks and modern communication devices. But what is striking about the Epstein case is that, it's been more than 2 decades now that the case has been investigated. It started in 2005, right? We're in
Mm.
2026. So, speaking of what keeps me up at night is how come that it took so long for the scandal to happen. So in a way, you might say, okay, it happens different times. So there are several episodes, but 20 years down the road, there are very few people, apart from the main perpetrator or perpetrators, that have been jailed, right? For instance.
Mm.
So what I was doing in the Epstein LinkedIn post that you mentioned is trying to use what we learned from the Catholic case example,
Mm-hmm.
Catholic case. What can we learn to inform our understanding of a case such as Epstein? And of course, it's always difficult, right, to generalize across cases. But well, first there is this observation that it took very long time to happen, and it's still, to some extent, it's still not yet completely purged. And then the question, was, okay, can we think about this group of elite people, including academics, as a community? Because this was a key concept in our church paper. We were looking at places, dioceses, as communities, and think about what are the dynamics within the community that might facilitate or hinder the occurrence of a scandal, right? So can we think about this community of super rich, super powerful people as being a community? And to be honest, I don't know.
Mm.
But it's indeed quite homogeneous, I think. Well, in terms of kind of people you find in this group, power is definitely involved, and it's connected, but it's kind of disconnected from the rest of the world. So I think there are some elements that we do find, and that might explain why it took so long for the affair to break in a way. But of course, yeah, again, we have to be very careful because I don't have specific data about this. Sorry.
One final question about all of this. Does your research specifically, or in your opinion, does science more generally offer any form of societal devices to fight rumors and to make this whole system what looks to me like a malfunctioning system from what you're describing function better? Is there any hope to fight this with science?
Well, the first step is to understand what is going on.
Mm.
So I think we are there when it comes to
Hmm.
scandal, and I mean there is work on rumors. But when it comes to scandal, I think we are at the very beginning of the inquiry. So we are kind of the most basic science here, and we're trying to understand the mechanisms behind this phenomenon. When we get to better understanding, I think maybe we can think about fixes. So the question is, what do we want to prevent? Do we want to prevent scandal from happening? So the revelation of misconduct? I'm not sure. What I think what
Right.
we want to prevent is the occurrence of misconduct in the first place,
Mm.
right? So yeah, we have to be careful about what we wish for. So think about rumors. In this case, we want rumors, right? We want information to circulate. So rumors is unverified information, right? Sometimes rumors tend to be in line with reality. Sometimes they don't. But we may want these rumors to circulate. If some kids are abused in a community, we want to know, right? And we want to be able to do something about it, right? So yes, first gaining a deep understanding, theoretical one, conceptual one of what is going on. Yeah, there is some work in sociology. There is some work in political science. We try to build an organizational perspective, try to think about how do these things work in the context of organizations, and I think we are making good progress as a community, but we are only at the beginning of understanding what is going on here. And I usually quip that it's an interesting topic because there are cases keep happening, right? There are always new scandals happening, so we have a lot of empirical material to study.
So we're probably unlikely to exhaust this topic immediately anyway.
Yes, indeed.
I I hope you come again then to explore this when a new scandal erupts or even before that. Julien, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, and looking forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone.